disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Epstein.
I made immediate and repeated efforts to save Mary Jo by diving into the strong and murky current.
Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also.
Who masters those technologies in some way will be the masters.
Average house prices in Dublin, €509,000.
Is that others have pointed out this excess death started and correlates with the vaccine program.
In 1932, seeking to study untreated syphilis in black men, doctors from the United States Public Health Service recruited subjects in Macon County, Alabama.
A set of human bones recovered from the wreckage of the Sewol ferry has been confirmed to be one of the students considered missing since the ferry sank in 2014.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the North of Richmond podcast. We've been working super hard the last few months to bring you something mesmerizing and educational at the same time. And many of these stories we have lined up are stories not many people nowadays know even happened. They're all significant historical events that are not taught much in school, and they're definitely stories every person on Earth should know, which is why we started this show. Please note that any information relayed in these retellings has been gathered with much attention to detail to the best of our knowledge and capability, and any opinions expressed hereafter are ours alone. We reserve the right to disclaim that most of the research done has been through internet sources, history books, newspapers and clips, and social media. Any incorrect or iffy information will be notated during the progression of each episode to the best of our ability, and no action should be taken in any way, legal or otherwise, based on the information relayed here. That being said, some details, as stated, may be incorrect or unconfirmed, and if you so choose, please feel free to correct them in the comments section of this video, as we are all here to learn. Now, why long-form deep dives? Well, I've always been a fan of true crime, and for those of you who've been following my TikTok since the beginning of 2020, you'll know that I started as a true crime TikTok page. I follow all the deep dive true crimers like Crime Weekly, Stephanie Harlow, Rotten Mango, Bailey Sarian, Sherilyn Dale, Eleanor Neal, Daniel Kirsty, Kimberlea, and Dark Livity, all of them. And I absolutely love true crime. I think that with any true crime content, it's important to be able to understand the background of the perpetrator as well as their family dynamic and upbringing. And this is especially pertinent to the political world. The way politicians work in any country is very much the same, money being involved in most of it. And while we may not agree on how to get to the outcome, it's important to understand how the people in power think and work. And that starts at the very beginning, sometimes even before they were born. And with that being said, let's get into the first case of North of Richmond, Ted Kennedy and the Chappaquaddick incident. Incident, quote unquote. I say that because I really truly feel like this was a murder. But for the sake of what the sources say and for the sake of the Kennedy family, as well as Robert Kennedy Jr., who is currently running for president, and respect for him, I will continue to call it the incident, although I'm pretty sure Mary Jo Kopechne's family would feel very differently, although I have not asked them. So let's start here. Give me just a second here. All right. So Joseph Patrick Kennedy was born on September 6th, 1888 to Patrick Joseph Kennedy and Mary Augusta Hickey. Joseph's father was an American businessman, mostly dealing in the industry of social drinking, eventually owning several bars by the time that Joseph was born. While I couldn't find much information about Joseph's mother, his father is fairly well researched. By 1884, Patrick Joseph had found his way into the somewhat small Democrat Party in Boston and began a career in politics. He ended up serving 5 consecutive terms of 1 year in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and after that, he served 3 two-year terms in the state Senate. But by 1895, he realized that he preferred the underground and backroom world of the Boston political scene much more than the limelight, and so he immersed himself in that world. He became a member of the unofficial Democrat Board of Strategy, which I couldn't find any information online about, but I'm sure it was not above board in any way. Given the way that people buy politicians, I don't know, I think it's very much, this was probably the seedy underground of the Boston political scene. I don't know what you think, Shane, but yeah, I don't know. I couldn't find much about the Democrat Board of Strategy really at all. Oh,
yeah, and you're really not going to find much about it. A, because it's unofficial, and B, if there was ever a document that actually led to its alleged existence or showed that it allegedly existed, it would bring about a whole lot of implications that would bring down some very powerful families in the United States.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm very much sure of that. But, I mean, who knows?
But, I mean, if Kennedy was involved, you're also talking about other big names. The Rockefellers, they had family members there in Boston. You're talking about the Bush family. You're talking about all these major power players. Back in those days, the power centers were New York and Boston.
Right.
So those were your two big port areas, and that's where most of your old money people settled and made their big business deals.
Right.
So,
well, and even my family was from New York, originally from Connecticut, but they settled in upstate New York. If there's any New Yorkers watching this podcast, the Walton House in Binghamton, New York, used to be my family's. They built it, the St. John's. But let's continue. So I think it's important to understand that Joseph grew up for a lot of his childhood with his father being a politician. That especially influenced him to go into politics in his adult life, even though he really had no intention when he got out of school to be a politician. It just kind of fell into his lap as he gained money and influence and power over people. And we'll get into all of that. But something that I felt was important to note is that Joseph was the oldest of 4 children that Patrick and Mary had. Their second child, Frances, died when she was 1, which I'm sure was hard on the family. And potentially traumatizing for a 4-year-old Joseph. I mean, I can't imagine being 4 years old and losing your little sister. And then on top of that, what happened next was his second sister, Mary, was born 3 weeks after his second sister, or his first sister, Frances, died. Like, I can't even imagine being a mother, losing a child, and then 3 weeks later having to birth another. Like, I don't even know. Like, and you guys can weigh in the comments on how you might feel about doing that, or if you've experienced something that like that yourself. Like, weigh in the comments. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, we see it today, but in today's times too. But we have to remember that back then, all these people had fairly large families, and the Kennedys were a very well known, very astute family within the Catholic Church.
Right.
So they were big power players, and the Catholic Church had a lot of power in the United States and around the globe. Still does, but not so much in the United States anymore.
Right. So I don't know. It's just something that kind of broke my heart when I read that. I just couldn't imagine, like, being a mom. I can't even imagine losing one of my kids and to have to birth one right after. No. Just no. But
yeah,
anyway.
and no, it's hard. It'd be hard even as a father, and having 5 kids of my own. You're a mom of 2. So
yeah,
I mean, even for me if something was to happen to one of my kids, and all of a sudden we had another child, it'd be kind of a very hard thing to bond. And maybe it's just me as a person, but as a father, it'd be kind of hard to bond with that one that just was born right afterwards.
Right. And I know that a lot of people back then, just based on historical records and things like that, like, it was not, especially the rich families, like, they had things like wet nurses and like nannies to take care of their kids after they were born. And so, like, I don't even know. I mean, was Mary that involved in her children? Or did she birth them and leave them to the nanny? I just don't know. And so, like, and I don't say that, don't come at me in the comments section, guys, for saying that. This is historical fact. Like, it was common for rich families for centuries to have nannies, governesses, au pairs. I mean, these kids probably had at least one nanny in the house or one servant helping with them at all times, based on the money that Patrick Joseph was making, not only in his bar business, but also as a politician, because, like, insider trading, guys, it's been happening for a very long time. And if you think it wasn't happening back then in the late 1800s, then I don't know what to tell you. It totally was. I guarantee it. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to think about here, is like, could Mary have just given the kids to a governess or a nanny, and just kind of checked out because her daughter just died? Like, who knows? We really don't know. Like I said, I couldn't find much about Mary herself, but
there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of historical accounting as to Mary herself. Or the children. I mean, we see select accounts of the various ones that were actually in the media spotlight and different things like that. But when it comes to the actual accounting for Mary later on, even in the kids' lives, you don't see her pop up too much at all.
And so it kind of makes me wonder if maybe she was a little bit checked out. Just kind of in the sense of, like, okay, well, I'm a rich social elite woman in Boston. My kids get taken care of by other people. But who knows?
That's the thing. A lot of the socialites, that was their mindset back then.
Right?
The men went to work. They smoked cigars. They went to work. They worked at a bank. They worked at the finance, in finance or whatever their jobs were. And the ladies, they went to these fancy parties.
Right.
It'd be like, Haley, you going to some cocktail ball every night.
Right.
And
wouldn't that be the life?
One thing that we, like, back then it didn't really even set in, but fetal alcohol syndrome was a huge problem back then because the mothers were alcoholics.
Right. See, and that didn't even reach my radar writing this. Like in my research and everything, I didn't even think one bit about that. And oh my gosh, like, what if that's the reason that Francis died? Like,
I mean, there's.
I mean, I know it was a whole year later, but still.
But I mean, even look at SIDS, or the sudden infant death syndrome. When you're, and I know we're kind of expanding this a little bit more than normal, but when you look at SIDS, there are instances of SIDS where it actually it was a natural cause, just sudden infant death. But
right,
there are other accounts in the same period of elites' children who just mysteriously died. And if you actually go back and read the accounts, more and more of those accounts actually appear to be neglect than anything. So that's just my 2 cents on it. But I'll let you keep going.
That's even more heartbreaking. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's continue. All right. So even though Joseph's little sister had just died and another one had just been born, he still seems to have thrived as best as he could have growing up. I mean, he had all the money in the world. I mean, technically. He attended Boston Latin School. Good grief, I can't talk tonight. So he attended Boston Latin School, and this is literally the oldest school in the United States. It's still around today. And I meant to grab a photo of the logo of this school, but I wasn't sure if I would be able to use it for copyright infringement concerns, and so I did not. But if you do a quick Google search, you can see the history of this school. It's actually really awesome. It's literally the oldest school in the United States for young people to be educated at. And this is the school that you want to send your kids to if you expect them to go to Harvard. Okay, so this school was founded in 1635, and it's literally always been the school that you send your kids to if you want them to go to Harvard. And that's exactly where Joseph ended up going to. He went to Harvard. He graduated in 1912 with a bachelor's of science in economics. And then after that, he began work as a bank examiner for the state of Massachusetts. And this part's interesting because his father, Patrick, by this time owned a lot of shares from the Columbia Trust Bank, which was in jeopardy of being bought out. And so Joseph, using his insider knowledge, working as a bank examiner, he borrowed a ton of money, about $45,000. And this is about, if I remember correctly, this is about $1.4 million in today's money. correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. If I'm remembering that incorrectly, I'm so sorry. But he borrowed a bunch of money on loan from his family and his friends, and he bought the rest of this bank so that his family wouldn't lose money. And in my humble opinion, I would for sure say that this is insider trading, at least by the looks of it. And I don't know if that's what you would say it is, Shane, or not. But this to me looks like insider trading.
Insider trading. There's this is the very reason we have a lot of the laws that we have today for
exactly. And you're never gonna guess what this guy goes on to do. Like,
oh, you mean like become the president of the bank?
And not even that. Like, it gets so much worse. You're just wait, okay? So like this was actually super significant because the bank then thanked him by making him the president of it, which is just insane, right? And I think it's fairly clear that by this time the Kennedys had very much immersed themselves in the world of politics and business, which really are just one world even today. Money gets you places, and Joseph had saved his family's money by buying this bank out himself. And Joseph made sure the papers were buzzing with this story, legitimately making sure that they were printing headlines calling him the youngest bank president in America, whether it was factual or not, because good press is what matters when you have high aspirations, right? So you guys should also know that he borrowed from this bank that he was president of in order to finance his stock trades and such. Like, so he's the president of this bank. He's taking out loans in order to fund his stock purchases in the newly formed stock exchange. Completely unregulated stock exchange. President of the bank, borrowing from his own bank.
And not to mention government employee.
Yep, that too. That too. So this was significant because this, in my humble opinion, really solidified the Kennedys as prominent elites in high society. And he hasn't even married his wife yet at this point. Okay, this is like all done by 1913. So now we're in 1914. And in what I'm assuming was an arranged marriage based on high society, Joseph married Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of the mayor of Boston, John F. Fitzgerald. And it wasn't long before they began a family. Their oldest son, Joseph Jr., being born in 1915. Then followed by the infamous John F. Kennedy in 1917. Subsequently, 7 other children followed. Rose Marie in 1918, Kathleen in 1920, Eunice in 1921, Patricia in 1924, Bobby Kennedy in 1925, Jean in 1928, and finally, the main subject of this whole deep dive, Edward Ted Kennedy in 1932. 9 children, many of whom would have tragedy befall them in the coming decades. Between 1916 and 1919, Joseph Sr. built an empire of money, investing in real estate, being the president of a bank, being a board member of Massachusetts Electric Company for all of New England, and running a shipyard, building warships for World War I, where he met and became friends with Franklin D. Roosevelt, whom from here on out I'm going to refer to as FDR or Roosevelt for time's sake. But at this time, FDR was the Assistant Secretary in the Navy. Okay? So by 1919, the war was over, and Joseph went to work for Hayden Stone and Company, a stock brokerage firm in the Wild West days of the stock market. And at this time, the stock market was completely unregulated. Okay, so you have to understand that when I say unregulated, I literally mean unregulated. And Joseph took all advantages that he could of that. He committed acts that would later be known as market manipulation and insider trading. And so I'd say my earlier statement about him buying the rest of this bank for his father was pretty spot on. So 1920, the roaring 20s. The war was over, people were feeling good, there was a stock boom that clearly benefited the rich. We saw jazz, speakeasies, the beginning of prohibition, the poisoning of alcohol by the US government. That's another deep dive. The stock boom definitely created a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, and the political tensions were very much like they are today. You could literally cut it with a knife. It was so bad. And people were fed up with being poor. And we were heading towards a depression, even in 1920, and even if people couldn't see it yet, although Joseph would claim later that he saw it coming from a mile away. And whether or not his economics background or his just instinct truly told him this, or even if he was lying, I don't know, but it happened. So this was the time of stocks exchanging with little to no government oversight or regulation. Dishonest trades were happening every day by people who knew how to play the system, but also knew better. Again, much like today. So I'm unsure how Joseph ended up on the corner of Wall Street and Broad Street on September 16th, 1920, but that was the day that Wall Street was bombed. Noon sharp, a horse-drawn carriage packed with 100 pounds of dynamite set on timers and 500 pounds of heavy metal weights that acted as shrapnel stopped across the street from JP Morgan and Chase near the same corner. And back then it wouldn't have been called JP Morgan and Chase, it was just JP Morgan. But it stopped near the same corner that Joseph was on. When this horse and buggy exploded, Joseph was thrown backwards, absolutely stunned. He was fine, but 40 other people of the common working class of Wall Street were killed, and 143 were critically injured, though the New York Times at the time claimed 300 were killed. Some sources even say that everyone was killed, but that's just some sources. These bombs were actually found by the Bureau of Investigation at the time to be in connection with the 1919 anarchist bombings, when 9 bombs in 8 cities were detonated, almost all at the same time. And I didn't know about this story until I started researching Joseph Kennedy, and it led me down a rabbit hole about the Wall Street bombing and then the 1919 bombings. And it's insane. If you guys want to go down a little rabbit hole, look into the 1919 bombings. I mean, it's all this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it here. But so all of these bombs go off almost all at the same time. And one of the targets was actually the Attorney General at the time, Mitchell A. Palmer. His bomber was killed when the bomb actually went off too early. He was on his way walking up to Palmer's house and the bomb detonated. Palmer's house was completely decimated, and the house across the street was also damaged a bit too. And you'll never guess who lived there. FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt. They lived there and they could have been killed. This is important information to understand the world that was being created here. Socialism was still on the rise after the fall of the Russian Empire, and the world had just fought an entire war where 9 different monarchies fell to the rest. Countries were being conquered, colonized, and divvied up because the winners take the spoils, and the rich created a system that really only benefits them to this day, unless we are smart. But even then, entrepreneurship is really only accepted if it can benefit people all the way to the top. And Joseph was making his way to the top. He wasn't super injured by the Wall Street bombing, mostly just a few bruises and a concussion, and he recovered. And by the time his fourth daughter, Eunice, was born, he was hired to help prevent a bear raid on the Yellow Cab Company. A bear raid is when someone or multiple someones decide to start rumors about a company or start buying and selling tons of the company's stock in order to drive the price of the stock down. And we actually still see this, although it's illegal. And then for the next few years, he had more kids. Bobby and Jean were born. He kept manipulating his way into making money however he could, using inside information and his economic knowledge. He even became a Hollywood insider, dude. Like, so he used funds to purchase a few failing film companies, and he turned those film companies into Radio Keith Orpheum, known to history as RKO. And for those of you who are watching this who are big Hollywood history buffs, you will recognize this name. It used to be one of the biggest film producers in Hollywood until it went out of business. And I'm not sure what year it went out of business, but I'm sure you will let me know down in the comments. And then 1929, the stock market crashed. Joseph, as I said, claims he knew it would, but who's to say? At this point in time, he was worth about $4 million when this happened. And so that he would continue to make money, he took that money and he began investing in real estate wherever he could, bringing his net worth to $180 million by 1935. And when Prohibition was repealed, he started a liquor distribution company with James Roosevelt, the son of FDR. And this one kind of shocked me. I was like, really? They were that close? That one little acquaintance during World War I, they were that close that James Roosevelt and Joseph Kennedy started a business together. Like that kind of flabbergasted me a little bit, but who knows? So with this liquor importing company, they imported several different kinds of alcohol. So Joseph apparently didn't drink much himself. And I suspect that this might have been due to him watching his father while he was growing up, owning these bars in these seedy backwoods, not even backwoods, like in the city, but like back room political scenes. I don't know. That's just me speculating, but who knows?
Backroom parlors.
Yeah, the backroom parlors. Thank you. I needed that. I was like, I can't think of the term I'm looking for, but let me back up, because Joseph's youngest and final child would be born on February 22nd, 1932, in the middle of all of these business ventures. Little Edward Ted Kennedy. By the time Ted was 3, his father was rich enough by playing the system that he could afford to set up $1 million trust funds for all 9 of his kids, making them literally all millionaires. So Ted Kennedy's a millionaire at not even 3 years old, but it is what it is. I think the term for that nowadays is nepotism baby. Am I right on that? I have no idea. No idea.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
So, funny history, just a short little history lesson. But nepotism actually comes from dealing with a monarchy. If you hear about nepotism and you trace it all the way back, people got really sick of the monarchs actually giving all their family friends positions in the royal court. So that's where nepotism came from. If I was a king and you were a friend and I gave you a position, let's say Joker.
What a dick. Just kidding.
I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
But if I gave you that job and it said you're gonna make $180,000 a year to tell jokes in front of the court, even though the jokes might only be worth $20,000 a year.
Right.
So a lot of the nepotism charges, even back in the 1800s, early 1900s, you saw a lot of companies actually going away from the nepotism. Like, you couldn't just get a job with your family members working at these places without kind of being looked at sideways.
Right. Huh. Interesting. I never knew that. Now I'm intrigued. Now we need to do like a nepotism monarchy person, like somebody who totally benefited. We could do like, oh my gosh, there's so many from the British monarchy. Now that I'm thinking about it, we'll figure out a British monarchy nepo baby to to do one on, to do an episode or a series on. Okay, so all 9 Kennedy children are millionaires before they're adults, but before we can leave Joseph behind for a bit, let's focus on a few more things. Okay, so I thought that some of these things that are coming up here are things that you guys should know in order to truly understand the kind of environment that Ted Kennedy and the rest of the Kennedy children grew up in. So I mentioned that Joseph had invested in real estate, and most of the real estate that he bought was purchased with the money he made from importing alcohol. Some of his most notable real estate acquisitions were several places within New York City, a horse racetrack in Florida called Hyannis Point, I think is what it was called, and Chicago's Merchandise Mart. The Kennedys literally owned the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, and that truly became the center of the Kennedys' personal fortune. With the purchase of the Merchandise Mart, this really solidified the Kennedy name among the Irish American politicians in America, and this would help the Kennedy sons in the future. Joseph Kennedy was a very staunch Democrat, supported FDR so much that he donated and campaigned for him in his first election. 1933 was when he was elected. And Roosevelt thanked him by appointing him to be the first head of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. There we go. Yep. So all of these seedy practices, this insider trading, these manipulations of stocks that Joseph literally made his fortune in the 1920s by doing, he was now head of the entire 3-letter agency that was created to stop those kinds of things. So yeah, that was a thing. And I couldn't believe this. I was like, okay, so first of all, we've got some like deals going on, obviously, in some backhanded ways, right? Because, like, if Joseph is going to campaign and raise money and donate for a presidential candidate, and then that candidate turns around and thanks him by making him some head of a committee or an organization or an agency, what does that tell you? Like, to me, that says shady as fuck. Okay, like, okay, that seems to me like political bribery in a way. I don't know how you feel about it, Shane, but to me, that's political bribery.
You mean a lot like today's politics?
Yeah, a lot like today's politics, of course. But this is like so blatant because, like, literally most of the research that I did for this part came from the History Channel and Wikipedia. And so, like, all of these things are on both of those websites. So you can see blatantly these, like, political bribery schemes happening and whatnot. Like,
I mean, quite honestly, throughout this entire episode, and maybe I'm wrong, but we could literally spend like 6 months just on the crimes that were committed between 1865 and up to what is it right now, 1934?
Yeah.
I mean, just in regards to the Kennedys, but I mean. And a lot of people have to understand that this is not the time of Camelot.
Mm-mm.
So we're still 30 years before the age of Camelot really taken hold. So there's still quite a bit of life left in the story.
Right. I just like some of this shit when I was writing this, I'm like, oh my God, like the amount of dishonesty and you know how like people always talk about like there used to be honor among men, there's no honor among men anymore. I find more honor among the common people nowadays than I do in any political circle historically.
Well, historically, let's just be real. There were no women in politics.
Mm-mm.
So who was there to actually counter any of the business people? And in order to run for government back then, if you didn't run with the shades or with the shady people, you didn't have the backing to actually get into office. And it's not like it's not like today where we can actually go and I can start a campaign right here on sitting at my computer and get elected having never left my house.
Right. Like some of the people running on TikTok. I have a friend, General Hamilton on TikTok. He's from here in Colorado. He's running for Senate. And he told me I should actually run for governor with him. And I was like, I don't know if I'm old enough or if that's the job that I want.
But here's, and we're gonna kind of caveat off of this and kind of throw a little bit of current events in here too. But I mean, let's say you did. Back then, it was illegal to print a whole lot of like disparaging things against anybody. If you did. And they found out who printed it or who actually changed the type press to actually print what was said. They would send the mob over to you.
Oh, yeah. And it wouldn't even just be the mob. It would be like, it could be like a freaking group of people from town.
Yeah.
Like
if you're well liked in town and there's something bad that gets put out, town people would just run you out.
Oh, of course. Well, and I think that you still see some of that today. It just might not be talked about.
Well, yeah, we see that with like Antifa or...
Oh, yeah. Hey, fun fact for those of you watching, if you type antifa.com into your web browser, it takes you to whitehouse.gov. Just heads up. It's interesting. Fun little factoid. Anyways, let's continue. Excuse me. So the SEC was created to stop these dishonest and backhanded ways with which Kennedy made his money, and Joseph is now the head of it. So do with that what you will. Fast forward to 1936, Joseph even wrote a book. He wrote a book during Roosevelt's second campaign to try and help sway the support of the people towards him. And Roosevelt then thanked him again by appointing him chairman of the U.S. Maritime Commission. And then after that, in even more thanks, about 10 months or so, he was the chairman of the U.S. Maritime Commission, and he didn't really like that job, so FDR gave him a new one, and he was made an ambassador to the UK. And guess what he did? He tried on several occasions to make secret meetings with Adolf Hitler. So not just once, not just twice, but several fucking times. And this to me, like, bothers me, okay? Because, like, he knew this to me tells me that he wasn't a good person, okay? And we all know what's happening right now with Israel and Palestine, and I'm going to say what I say on TikTok. The Palestinian people are not the same as Hamas. The Israeli people are not the same as their government. The Israeli government is not the same as their people, and Hamas is not the same as the Palestinian people, okay? But what was happening in Germany, what was happening to the Jewish people was horrendous, atrocious, and should not have happened in any way, shape, or form. And the fact that Joseph Kennedy just even thought that Adolf Hitler could be reasoned with, because that's what he thought. He literally thought that America could just reason with Adolf Hitler. There had to be some sort of understanding. Okay, but it gets so much worse, okay? Because he truly believed that the conflict that was happening was not the answer, okay, to dealing with Hitler and Nazi Germany. But in fact, he wanted to deal with it via diplomacy. And Hitler either never replied or refused the meeting requests. And mind you, these attempts were made before America was forced into the war in 1941 with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And from what I can tell, Joseph Kennedy also never faced any consequences for attempting to consort with Nazis either. He truly and firmly believed that some sort of understanding could have been reached with Hitler, and he very much disagreed with Winston Churchill's thought process that it was impossible. Kennedy believed this so much that he attempted not just several times in 1938 to meet with Hitler, but also several times again in 1940, right before the Blitz bombings began on London. Like, I'm not even kidding you. Like, this bugged me so freaking much because, like, I think I've already explained why this bugged me, but like, there had to have been some sort of American intelligence telling them that bombings were going to be happening on London. Like, they knew how just intense the war between England and Germany was becoming. Joseph had to have known that something was coming, and the fact that you're still trying to reach out to this dictator and come to some sort of understanding that is obviously just not going to be reached. It's giving just shitty person vibes. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking that, but I just don't see that as a good thing. or something a good person does, or something that a person does who cares about their people, or just the people of the world in general. But who knows? It's said that Joseph was very much in agreement and understanding with the Nazi Party as well. And at one point, he had been told about the discrimination, violence, and vandalism rising against the Jewish people in Germany. And his response? Quote, "Well, they brought it upon themselves," end quote. Enough said, I guess. Joseph Kennedy, everybody. He even told the German ambassador Herbert von Dirksen that it wasn't so much that they were trying to rid the world of Jews that was the problem. And these are my words rephrasing what he said, but it was the fact that they were doing it so blatantly that the citizens of the Western world were not stomaching it well, and it was creating bad publicity that basically just wasn't going over in a good way at all. He even would refer to the Jewish people as kikes or kikis. Not my words. Joseph Kennedy's words, not my words. But he would also call them sheenies. And if you are of Jewish descent and would like to educate us into the comments as to what these words specifically mean, all I could find was that they were derogatory terms for Jewish people. And so I would very much love to understand a little bit more about your history as a Jewish person. And so if you would like to, feel free to drop it in the comments section of this video so we can all kind of learn from you and understand what exactly this means and how it could make somebody feel at the time. But there's that. So this guy, dude, like, oh, he annoys me. Okay, so he felt all of this. He was talking all of this stuff. And once some of his ideals and comments came out, he was recalled from his ambassador duties as quickly as possible and brought straight to the White House because, as an Irish American Catholic with major political pull with the people, Roosevelt desperately needed his help yet again to be elected for a third term. And in exchange for Joseph doing a radio broadcast to the nation to garner support for FDR, he was promised support from FDR to run for governor of Massachusetts, everybody, even though he's a Nazi supporter and didn't like Jewish people. So there's that. And after Roosevelt was reelected, Joseph resigned from his ambassadorship. I suspect he was forced to resign, not of his own choosing. But it was clear that tensions between Roosevelt and Joseph Kennedy were getting high. And Joseph was convinced that FDR was going to lead America into a, quote, Armageddon, end quote. And by this time, his oldest son, Joe Jr., was a delegate from Massachusetts, and it didn't help matters that Joe Jr. was speaking out against a third term for FDR. It was very clear to everyone in the political scene of the time that Joseph had worn out his usefulness, and when the war broke out, no one felt he could be trusted to help with the war effort, and I'm really not surprised by this. I mean, what do you think after hearing all of that? Because I read all of this as I was writing it, and I just was like, oh my God, bro. Like, this dude was a Nazi supporter. Like, this couldn't have been good for his political career in any way. And it wasn't. It really wasn't.
No, it was absolutely destructive to it. And I mean, that's the point. most political dynasties come to an end because of disagreements from longtime supporters.
Well, and I think this isn't even like a disagreement. This is just like blatant disregard for right and wrong, in my opinion. But
yeah, and
if people think differently,
we
let us know in the comments. But
oh, absolutely. I prefer people let us know in the comments.
yeah, I couldn't even, like, reading this. I was just like, are you serious, dude? Like, come on. And then, so yeah, and while all of these things were happening and going on in Joseph's political and work careers, he was actually uprooting his family all the time, living in Palm Beach, Florida, and Hyannisport, Massachusetts. Okay, so I'm sorry. Earlier I misspoke. Palm Beach, Florida is where the horse race track was. It did start with an H, but it wasn't Hyannis Point or Port. Hyannisport is in Massachusetts, so I'm so sorry. They also lived in Bronxville, New York, and even St. James Court in London. That was during his U.S. ambassadorship. And by the time they had reached London, little Ted Kennedy had already attended 11 different schools, which is a lot for a child. I mean, I thought it was bad when I attended like 2 different elementary schools and 2 different middle schools. Like, I mean, how many schools did you attend as a kid?
Me?
Yeah, how many schools did you attend?
5, all in the same school district.
See, like 11 though. Can you imagine
really
going to
lucky,
11
though.
schools?
I got really lucky though. My dad was stationed at Ellsworth, and his job, that's pretty much the only place that his job was. So we pretty much got to stay there that whole time. Of course, my dad did deployments overseas, but we were
and that was like all the way through high school?
Yeah, he got out in 2002.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So, but most of my childhood he was deployed until I was about 12 years old.
Right. Huh. See, and I only attended like 4 schools throughout my whole life. 5 schools, if you count high school. But like, I can't imagine going to 11 schools. Like, that's just insane.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. But I mean, a lot of Ted, and maybe it's me, but I would have a feeling that a lot, like their nannies and stuff like that they probably did do a lot of the education themselves.
Right.
For their nannies. So whether or not he was the new kid, he was always probably way, way more advanced than most of the other kids.
See, and that's what I was wondering in researching this is like, did he have like some sort of private tutor? I mean, I'm sure his family could have afforded one. So, and this is something too, guys, that like when we're looking into these people, understanding like their educational background and how they grew up matters as well. Because, you know, you look at people who commit crimes like Ted Bundy, for example, very well-educated person. Same with, the son of Sam seemed extremely well-educated. The Zodiac killer must have been like way up there on the IQ scale. Kenneth Bianchi, one of the Hillside Stranglers, I mean, he had a IQ of 116. I mean, there are many people out there who commit crimes, whether purposefully or not purposefully, that are very well-educated people. And that's how some of these psychopaths and serial killers can get away with them for so long. And I'm not by any means calling Ted Kennedy a psychopath. I'm just making the educational background connection here, guys. Okay, so you don't need to come at me in the comments section saying I called Ted Kennedy a psychopath. I did not do that, but in making these connections with true crime cases versus political true crime, there are these parallels here that I want to make sure to highlight. High education tending to be one of them, especially for people in power or people who are wanting that power over other people in a psychopathic way. So there is that. I hope I explained that well enough. So 11 schools Ted Kennedy went to, and I'm sure that he always felt like the new kid. I've been the new kid. It's an awful experience. Nobody likes you when you're the new kid, but being the new kid has its pros and cons, and Ted very much learned how to navigate it to his advantage. And that is where we will leave off until the next episode. So thank you for joining us for this entire experience. We look forward to next week's episode and getting to spend time with all of you again. Look for our live streams starting in 2 weeks. It won't be the same as Pot and Politics used to be over on Clapper. If you used to follow us for live streams over there a few times a week, we used to smoke weed and talk geopolitical news stories for the week. We're going to start that up again here in a couple of weeks. And so those live streams will be able to be caught on Rumble and YouTube. And of course, for the audio listeners, if you so choose to, you can go ahead and come on over to YouTube, come on over to Rumble, and watch the video version, which is slightly longer. They're extended versions, and you will be able to see photos and video clips if available in these episodes. North Richmond podcast is released every week, every Thursday, with a live stream. We're still deciding on what day to do the live stream on. So here we go. Any final thoughts?
Nope. And like you said, want to thank everybody for listening for as long as they did. I know that some of the people may find that the deep dive format, the first episode, may be boring to people. Let us know in the comments, because we want to make this about you guys and try to help guide us in more of a constructive and critiquing way that is actually beneficial. Because
exactly.
I mean, we could pump out stuff, but without knowing the backstory behind these politicians, without knowing the backstories to these crimes, it's kind of hard to understand how decisions were made in the 10 seconds that they were made.
Exactly.
And I think that's going to bring us full loop.
Yeah. 10 seconds, guys. That's all it takes. 10 seconds. All right, guys. Much love. Thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day and stay safe, stay awake, stay alive.